Welcome once again, listeners, to Leading with Integrity, the podcast for modern managers. A hot topic in recent years is diversity and inclusion. We've talked about it a little bit in the past with a couple of previous guests, but today I'm joined by Flo, who is the founder of Diversity in the Boardroom. We're going to be talking about how companies, managers and leaders can promote better diversity, more inclusive workplaces, particularly from the top leadership level all the way down. So there's going to be a couple of interesting topics. We're also going to cover some leadership as well, of course, because it is all tied up in the same issue. And we're going to hear all about the work that Flo does to promote and solve this. So it's an important conversation. I hope you enjoy listening to it, and let me know in the comments, let me know in your review, or just drop me an email. Up to you. This is Leading with Integrity, Leadership Talk, the podcast for first-time managers who are working in tech-driven businesses and teams and who want to be more effective, people-first leaders. Each week, you will learn the crucial strategies, mindsets, and practical tips that successful modern leaders follow to be engaging, ethical, and authentic managers who get the best from their teams. And we'll achieve all of this via weekly conversations with leaders, with leadership experts, entrepreneurs, and business owners, people who have already walked this path and have some amazing insights to share, with an added sprinkling of occasional solo episodes and some group chats where we'll have multiple guests. My name is David Hatch, and I will be your host. And leadership has always been a passion for me. After a career spent in a series of small businesses during 15 years in the aerospace industry, 5 or 6 of those at the end of that career were in a space startup in the UK. So trying to launch satellites into orbit, very cool stuff. And through all of that experience, I learned that the secret to successful management is in the ability to apply great leadership. And in turn, the secret to great leadership, it's all about your integrity, putting people before profits.
Welcome to the Leading with Integrity podcast. Leadership talk for the modern manager. With your host, David Hatch.
Thank you, listeners, for joining us again today on this sunny-ish English morning. I'm joined today by Florence, my guest from Diversity in the Boardroom. So, Florence, thanks so much for joining me this morning.
Well, thank you for having me.
Oh, you're very welcome. We're going to have a great chat today, I'm sure, and it's going to be a very interesting and important topic that we're going to cover. So let's get us started by handing over to you, really, to introduce yourself, tell the listeners a bit about your background, what you do today, how you've gone from one to the other, and what gets you out of bed in the morning, really.
Yeah. I'm Florence Weber-Zuanigh. I am a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant, as well as a certified and a facilitator. And I spent more than 12 years in advertising, media, and marketing, which for me was soul-sucking pretty much the entire time. The change for me was really having children. I couldn't tell them, in the evening, yeah, go get your dreams or live your life by your values and not be doing it myself. I felt really hypocritical. So I think for me, that was really the thing. I was like, okay, now it's really time to get my shit together and find purpose for me and what's meaningful. So that was the initial catalyst for the change. And then just the one thing I loved about the job was, looking after teams, helping them grow as humans and in their job, helping them work together. So the initial bit of looking at coaching and facilitation made a lot of sense. But throughout that, as you reconnect to who you are, who you were, and all of that, the focus of my business on diversity in the corporate world felt quite natural. And yeah, that's about it.
Yeah, so interesting story. I love what you're saying about feeling like you're being a bit hypocritical, and it reminds me of the whole concept of authenticity and kind of living your values. In one way, it's nice to see that you've made that change and you're really enjoying what you're doing now and you're living that purpose. But on the other hand, it's quite bad that you felt that where you were working wasn't going to allow you to do that. And I don't know if it says a lot about the ad world and the industry there, whether has it still got a few hangovers from the days of Mad Men, do you think? Or is that just an assumption?
Actually, I mean, obviously it depends, like from organization to organization. It's hard to like make a general statement about it, but there's still a lot of organizations within the ad world where you do have a lot of diversity at the entry level. People with a lot of different backgrounds, ethnic backgrounds, many young women. And, the further up you go, the further up it's old, white, cisgender male. So, yeah, I guess that would be a big hang up from the Mad Men days, yeah.
Sadly so. The more things change, as they say. Which actually leads us nicely into the next question. So when we look at that kind of the senior management, the boardroom level of diversity, I mean, there's some pretty depressing stats around it, aren't there? You look at the FTSE 100, for example, I think it's less than 10% women, about 11%, I think, of different race makeup. And then I can't remember what it was for transgender. I think it was 0, wasn't it, actually?
Yeah. In terms of LGBTQIA plus and disclosed disabilities, it's 0% of the CEOs from the FTSE 100. It's and I think it's quite telling as well about the things that are being put in place in the UK. There's still, like reviews and like a big emphasis that's being put on things such as ethnic diversity and gender diversity in big quotation mark, because it's really gender binary. It's just to get more women into leadership position and on board roles. But even in those two markers, at least, if those were the two things that we focus on, but it was done well, or it was progressing nicely, that would be something, right? But it's not even the case. We still have 11% of 100 companies. We don't even have one person from a marginalized ethnic background on their board. So it's in 2023, knowing that there's been like quite some effort that has been done like in the past 5 years or so, it's a little bit terrifying, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's one thing if it's a problem no one's working on. But as you say, if with all the effort that's gone in over the last 5 years and it's still quite bad stats, yeah, terrifying might be the right word.
So many companies, they're working on it, but it's more like a box to tick exercise that they have to be shown doing, rather than, we know that our company can have an impact in its sector or can have an impact like in the working world in general. So I think there's probably like a lack of commitment and of really owning that impact.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I guess it's like the difference between the letter and the spirit of a law, isn't it? It's, one thing is do the minimum and the other is do the right thing.
Exactly. And there is still so many things being put out there about, like the business case for diversity in companies, in leadership and in boardrooms, like, employee engagement seems to prove, like the workplaces are healthier and people are more productive and more performant and you're more competitive. But why do we have to make a business case for something that is just so basic as, human beings, that everybody should be able to like see themselves represented? It's very bizarre that we're still looking at that in 2023. But what's a good thing for businesses about diversity? Why should they do it? Well, we should do it because this is the right thing to do.
Yeah, it's that classic change management problem, isn't it? When you've got an established structure, and I mean, it speaks to all sorts of concepts, doesn't it? Like institutional privilege and all that kind of stuff, which actually I'm probably preempting the next question, which is, so we've talked about those stats. We've seen the cases, and I mean, the FTSE 100 is a good indicator, but let's work on the assumption that is generally reflective of the whole economy. Why is that, do you think? This is the really difficult question, isn't it?
I think there's also a lot of people that are currently in a position of privilege to make those changes, or at least, to impact and to foster those changes, are people that are the least impacted by it. So it's easy for them to like, yes, of course we will work on diversity and inclusion, but it's still something that's somewhat on the back burner. Their livelihood doesn't depend there. They don't have, like a child or, a grandchild or a neighbor whose livelihood depend on it. So it's obviously easy to overlook when you don't feel as involved.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a slightly different answer to what I've heard in the past when people talk about it at a structural level. But I think you're right if you tie it back to the people who are making the decisions, because ultimately that's the root cause, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, there is obviously like some big structural changes that need to be made, but the people that are right now in those positions to make those structural changes, do they have any personal incentive in doing so? And I mean, especially in those leadership positions when all you're looking about is kind of all you have to answer to are in terms of profit and so on. Obviously, like diversity, you have to look at it from that business case, and it's probably more difficult to connect it back to your personal values as a human and the values you want to foster within your organizations. But yeah, it doesn't make it less terrifying.
It is an interesting one. I mean, the business case one, I always... It's really difficult, isn't it? Like, why should you have? You're right. Why should you have to justify it? So if we applied that same logic to a completely different argument, so let's say fraud was legal, right? And you had to make a business case to not commit fraud. How ridiculous would that be? Like, or go even more extreme, like murder or something like that. It's nuts, isn't it, when you think about it that way?
Yeah, if you try to put it like in parallel with something else, it sounds mad to have to justify it. It's just, and even like even when it is protected, so like obviously like a lot of those characteristics are protected by like the Equality Act, but there's still a lot of people who say, oh yeah, but like we couldn't find the right person of color for the job, or we couldn't find the right woman for the job. Like, well, were you looking for exactly the same set of experiences that you've always been looking for? Or did you find someone with the right qualifications, but maybe we didn't have the privilege to have the right experience yet? So there's definitely like a big shift needed in mindset.
Definitely. And hiring is one of the bigger problems, but it's the easiest place to correct the issue, isn't it? It's starting to fill that pipeline of future leaders, isn't it? And I think that's particularly, with my understanding at least, of the way the law works in the UK, and I don't know what it's like in other parts of Europe or in the States for any listeners who are out there. But so here we have this, last time I checked anyway, it might have changed, so please correct me if I get it wrong. So we have this thing about positive discrimination, right? Which is technically legal, as long as you're using it in favour of a protected characteristic. And this idea of positive discrimination is something that I've got into heated arguments with people before in past jobs and just with friends down the pub. People see it incorrectly as giving a leg up to people who aren't the classic sort of white male category, if you like. But actually, if you read the letter of the law and you understand the spirit of it, that's not what it's about at all. And you hear this counter argument saying, well, I don't think it should matter. It should be the best candidate for the job, blah, blah, blah. Like, yeah, fine. But it's very rare you're going to get one standout candidate. You'll probably have 2 or 3 who are the same level of qualification, the same level of experience. And that's where this positive discrimination thing comes in. If you've got equally qualified candidates, but one of them has a protected characteristic, you are then allowed to employ that person for that reason. And it's this kind of misconceptions around what protections, what laws, what you can actually do about this problem. And that's where I think a lot of the problem comes in at the hiring stage anyway. And tell me if I'm wrong or if I'm on my soapbox or whatever.
Yeah. No, I think the name is misleading. Calling it positive discrimination. Obviously, everyone's fragility is triggered by it. This is a discrimination. Why is it happening? Why is it legal? But I don't know if you heard like the whole things that happened about Harvard in the past few weeks about what they're calling affirmative action, but it's essentially the same thing. is now not possible anymore. And there's been like quite a few talks, and I saw a Black woman who went to Harvard, and she was explaining it so eloquently, saying the idea is not that you put unqualified candidate there. It's like they have the right qualifications, maybe not from the right places because they couldn't get there. They're not less intelligent. They are just as intelligent as anyone else who is there. It's just that you help them get in front, get to that interview stage, get to that offer stage that because of, circumstances and privilege and so on, they wouldn't have been able to get to otherwise. It's not about picking someone from a different industry who has no understanding of what your organization is doing. It's not about that at all. It's just about, we have a seat here. What's a voice that would bring something be the same as every other voice who already have around the table?
That's a really good point as well, actually. So another problem, I guess, with this positive discrimination thing or affirmative action is that it assumes a level playing field, doesn't it? And actually, there's still built-in discrimination there because if we talk about it in terms of, say, white and black, so a white person is going to be much more able to have been to somewhere like Harvard. It might be the same level of qualification as the black person who couldn't get into Harvard. But that gives the opportunity, doesn't it, for the employer to say, well, actually, they're not equally qualified, so I'm going to choose this one. So that's a very good point.
Yeah, and in the case of Harvard, like there's as well the big sad, horrible irony is that almost half of the white students are actually legacy admissions, children of people who donated, children of staff. Who's really getting any form of discrimination in place in here? I don't think it's who they think.
Well, it's nepotism, isn't it? Cronyism, I guess. Which, again, I don't understand why that is legal, to be honest. It's always been one of my kind of pet hates, that. But let's move on. I don't want to get on the soapbox again. We talked a bit about the business case earlier, but I mean, that kind of leads us into discussing why this is such an important issue and why businesses should want to address it. Like, what is the impact for a company?
So there is obviously the impact on the company, and very often people think about the ripple effect on their employees or on their potential to hire. But there's also your clients. They're also anyone you might have to work with, partner with in some shape or form. Like when you make those kind of structural changes and insist on those kind of values, like the immediate effect are not only on your people, it's much, much wider than that. So if you think about that, like kind of the organization size, then you add the partners, then you add any kind of client, etc. Like the ripple effect of those kind of changes by one organizations are huge. So it's more like, why not do it when you know that in disregarding the sector you're in, you have as well the potential to be the blueprint for what not only diversity, but what inclusion could actually look like or lead to. For me, in my business, a lot of the things I think about, like, when you put together a business statement or things like that, the statement for me that was like, what's the day where I'm going to be like, okay, I can just close shop because my business is not needed in the world anymore. It's like when every kid could look at any kind of sector of activity, we're like, oh yeah, there's that amazing leader, CEO, whatever, that looks like me, that talks like me, that comes from a similar background like me, that uses a wheelchair like me. And at the moment, we're so far from being there. And it's so easy after to be like, oh yeah, there's not that many women in tech. But how do you want them to get in tech? Just when they get interested and look at the sector, you can see that they're not welcome here.
Yeah, it is an interesting problem, isn't it? In a lot of ways. I mean, it's a depressing and terrifying problem, as you say, but it is an interesting kind of dynamic around how all this works institutionally. And I mean, STEM is a big one, particularly with women, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, I don't want to put the people down on the aerospace industry or any of my past employers, but there's a whole thing in aerospace, isn't there, with exactly that issue. And you hear the platitudes, we love to hire more women, say, but they're just not applying for the jobs. What do you expect me to do about it? And all of these kind of things. Maybe think about why they're not applying for the jobs. Like, is it because your workplace, the way your industry is, the way it's perceived even, is not attractive to them for whatever reason. And it's easy to make these grand sweeping generalizations, isn't it? That women don't want to work in aerospace because it's full of miserable old men who are quite sexist. I think that's probably unfair to a lot of companies, but at the same time, it's the perception. So do something about the perception.
And there are really kind of two kinds of organization. There's the ones who are like, oh yeah, we know we should do something about it, but you can see they're dragging their feet. You know they're not doing it for the right reason, or that they don't have a genuine interest for it. Like there's many companies I had a chat with, and I could see what I was saying with the person in front of me. And then there's other times where you talk to organizations who are like, okay, we've sent out a survey, so we're doing that for the long term, but in the short term, we need to do this. And you're like, okay, they get it. They want to change it. And I think that's when I started with my business and that I knew companies really needed that kind of work, I was really insistent because I know they need it. I know for a fact how it works internally. I know they need it. And I was really insisting. And I was just like, well, if they don't get it, if the people that have that power don't get it, like, what can we do, really? There's other organizations out there that are doing it and that are going to be the blueprint for diversity and inclusion and equity in their sector. And they're definitely going to get much more clients, much more diverse hires, much more diversities of point of views and of voices. So I think in a few years, it's going to be interesting to see those differences as well. Those who like as part of their core and identity as an organization, and those who don't.
Bringing it back to the question about the impact for businesses, and I think you're right to tie it to the customers too, because ultimately, if your business isn't a reflection of your customers, then they're going to be less interested in buying from you. And you talked about it in terms of applying for jobs, and the CEO looks like me, talks like me, and all of that. But I think in a lot of ways, it's the same for the customer. Do the people at that company reflect my values, my experiences? Are they interested in me as a person? It all applies to customers as well as to employees in my head. So, I think as we get the new generations becoming more involved in the economy as well, I mean, there's studies out there that show millennials and Gen Z are much more interested in this kind of value-based dynamic and the whole purpose-driven thing. And they want to see businesses, they want to buy from businesses and work for businesses that are a reflection of those same values that they hold. And so I think, as you say, it's only going to become more important. And I'd like to believe that the companies that are just paying lip service and they're just doing it for the PR exercise, they're not actually going to survive if they keep doing that. But as you say, we'll have to wait and see.
I hope so. Come on, please deliver.
So going back to your own background then, your experience in the ad industry and all of that, what was it that first ignited your passion in this issue and trying to solve it?
Yeah, seeing how literally from a certain level of seniority, everybody was really looking the same and talking the same way. And even, like the reports when it came to diversity or inclusion, everything felt so disingenuous. I remember we had at some point, one of the companies I was at did a gender pay gap study, and they were showing us the results. And as they were showing us the results, they said something very that was very fishy to me. Like, for every exact same experience, there is no gender pay gap in our company. And I was like, why did they insist on those words exactly? Does that mean that if a man did like one more day of internship, then he's considered a different experience? Like, what are they exactly basing that on? And I think that that's really the problem in a lot of the D&I work. Some companies are so guilty, ashamed, and worried that they'd rather, put stuff under the rug rather than look at it, rather than be like, okay, we fucked up, this is bad, but we're working to address it. And this is when, and we want to take you along on that journey with us. That's a very different response as well from employees, to be like, oh, okay, they've been really honest about it. And, they really want to do something. They're being transparent. There's a level of trust. We spend more time in the workplace than we spend with our families most of the time. So if you don't have trust, what do you have really?
Absolutely true. Yeah. It reminds me of some of the cliches about statistics as well. Like 470,000% of statistics are made up on the spot, for example. And what's lies, damn lies, and statistics. Yeah. But it is interesting how you can twist the data to fit your narrative, and that's exactly how you do it, isn't it? We'll make very specific definitions, and we'll just adjust them. It's like gerrymandering, isn't it? In a way, you're just adjusting the boundaries to suit your narrative. And it is interesting. So I think one important aspect of that is getting the definition of terms right, isn't it? It's understanding what we mean by all of these words, which actually reminds me of another question I was going to ask you. So we talk about diversity, inclusion, equality, and equity. So those are 4 words. Some of them sound similar. What does each of them mean, and what are the important differences that managers need to be aware of?
There is an amazing quote from the Chief Diversity Officer of Accenture. I'm probably going to botch it, but it's something like diversity is a fact, inclusion is a choice. So diversity, this is just the way it is, the streets, you're going to, without knowing it, come across people that have invisible disabilities, people that have a very different heritage or background from you. It's just a fact. Inclusion is making sure that no one has to kind of hide who they are, or feel at least that they can't be their full self. And these days, there's still like a lot of places where it doesn't feel safe for a lot of people to be their full self at work. And then when it comes to equity, there's that very popular image that's a really good way of saying it. You've got like an apple tree, and you've got like a few different stools and 3 people of different sizes. Equality would be you give them each 1 stool. It means some people can get an apple from the tree. Some people still can't reach it. Equity is you make sure that everybody has the right size of stool so they can all actually get an apple from the tree. And I think that's something that's important for a lot of companies that are only now looking into diversity and inclusion. And then to say equality, that no, we need to get that one step further so everybody can actually reach the same things.
Yes, and it is a very important distinction, isn't it? And I think that too many regulations and laws focus on the wrong of those 2 words, don't they? And it's more about everyone gets the same stool rather than everyone gets the same access to the apples or the opportunity. So there is a fundamental change needed there, I think, in the way that lawmakers, which we're not going to have any impact on, sadly, I suspect, and business owners, managers need to think about that. So there we go. That's something perhaps that listeners can have an impact on. Tell us a bit more about your work as the founder of Diversity in the Boardroom, and what you're doing, how you work with companies to help them address these kinds of issues.
Yes, so there's 2 main ways that I work with companies. The aspect which is around more of a consultancy way of doing, having a look at where are they at, what's currently happening within the companies, and what are going to be the points that are more pressing than others. Because that's another thing about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Do it all in 24 hours. So sadly, you have to prioritize or, have a very set timeline for it. Sometimes it can look like, talks, workshops, and usually when I'm doing workshops or even group coaching, team coaching, one-to-one coaching, then I would be focusing on the people that have been, marginalized. So a lot of the work in D&I is about, like anti-bias trainings and making sure, that we understand those. And this is 100% needed. But while people are catching up, what happens to the people that have been marginalized? I mean, are they supposed to expect that a 2-hour anti-bias training is going to change their day-to-day and help them reach leadership quicker? So it's kind of those 2 things, like empower people who have been marginalized and yet, make sure that there is those level of awareness and work that's being done on both ends.
Bias is a really big topic, isn't it? Yeah. I think my favorite bias academically, and also the one I'm most prone to, is confirmation bias, which is the one where you have the idea in your head and then you go out and you only consider data that validates your bias, your idea. I guess that one's less of an issue when we're talking about this topic. So unconscious bias is presumably the biggest one that you have to challenge. So how can we avoid that bias, or at least recognize it and mitigate it?
I think the very privilege and fragility, because anytime that you look at it, or if you say someone, oh, what you said was racist, no, I'm not racist. There's that fragility that kicks in, and it's completely understandable. So I think first of all is understanding your level of privilege, and sometimes it means like understanding from maybe a place that is easier to look at. For example, did you grow up with two parents, where your parents able to be with you for homeworks? That's a privilege. That's not something everybody had. And once you get that kind of basic understanding of privilege, you can look at, oh yeah, right. There's many ways that I wasn't made to feel less than. So in the medical sector, for example, there's still so many research about topics that are based on white men. And yet, for certain pathologies, women are still looked at for those same symptoms. Black men are still being looked at for the same symptoms, but the research was never made for them. So all of that are privileges that we're really don't realize. And I think once you start to realize that, then it kind of unfolds. It creates a whole other lens that you can look at the world through. And I think that's kind of that basic level of awareness of your privilege. And then you can start to unpick things on your own, look for books or talks or whatever if you're interested. But I think first of all, working on your fragility so you're able to hear is a big one.
Yeah, there's a self-awareness piece in there, isn't there? I think, and being able to be honest with yourself, really, which is difficult. And you're right about the fragility thing and the automatic defensiveness. And I mean, there's places in the world where it's considered worse to be called a racist than to be a racist. For example, exactly. I mean, I say places in the world, social media mostly. But it is a problem, isn't it? Because on the one hand, yeah, I understand the defensive response, particularly if you don't realize you've got an unconscious bias and nobody views themselves as racist, I suspect. But actually, yeah, it's exactly what you're saying. It's think about that fragility, think about the privileges that you may not have realized you had, and then change the way you're looking at it. Yeah, I mean, that's got to be the first step.
And I think there's a way about, I mean, less so now, but I don't know about you, but I know that when I grew up, I thought that, a racist was, like the extreme racist, far right that uses slurs and stuff like that. But actually, I mean, someone can say racist stuff on a daily basis. So it's just about, letting go of those assumptions as well, unlearning all of that, and moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And in a lot of ways, the worst discrimination is the more pervasive, subtle one where it's harder to spot, because I mean, not just with racism, with sexism and all of the other types of ism. Quite often, the worst ones, the ones that are most prolific, if you like, are the ones who don't fit that kind of shouting the slurs and being overt in what they're doing. It's the people who I don't know if it's intentional or if it's back against this unconscious bias, but it's just their decision making on a quiet, almost stealthy level, isn't it? Is just perpetuating the privilege, if you like.
Yeah, I think there's a lot about institutions in that. When you think about, like the standard 9 to 5 and all of those things, it was all created in a world that at the time wasn't catered to have so many women in the workforce. And now when you have a man who's mansplaining, you're like, well, I mean, I just explained her. I have a woman on my team. Come on. Yeah, but it's still not okay.
Yeah, it is a tough one. And I think it goes back to education, doesn't it? So if I think back to when I was at school, I don't think we were ever taught about racism. for example. I mean, maybe showing my age there, maybe it's different now, but certainly back there, I mean, we did like the history lessons. We learned about Nazism quite a lot and the whole Second World War piece and why that was generally bad in general terms. But in terms of the modern day and what it looks like today and the fact that it still exists, I don't think we were ever told about it. So being able to understand it and recognize it from an early age, I think it also would help. But again, it goes back to what you're saying about institutionalized privilege and the whole structural issues that we've got with that. And I'm sure there's probably a few listeners who are going to violently disagree with this, but never mind. Right, let's talk a bit about leadership then. So first question I have for you on that one is, what is the biggest leadership lesson you've learned from your career so far?
I think it's been seeing leaders who didn't care, because no matter how they want to hide it or how they want to say that they care or that they're doing something about whatever the situation is, people always see through it and it's always glaringly obvious. So I think that piece about, the time and energy that kind of leaders are wasting pretending they care could be definitely spent elsewhere. And I've been in the corporate world for some time before that. I know how it feels to be on the receiving end of it. So I think being a caring leader is an important lesson.
I agree. Yeah, and there's an authenticity thing there as well, isn't there? So I mean, find a way to care, but then actually be genuine in showing that. And if you can't do it, maybe don't be a leader, I think.
Or even be honest if you don't care. I mean, I don't know about you, but I'd much rather have someone to be like, right now, our priority is X. I understand you, but I'm really struggling to make it fit, rather than have someone to like, yes, of course, we're looking into it. And then nothing happens. At least you know where you stand. And you can argue about it. Yeah,
I don't know. I think of those two, though, there's one I wouldn't want to work for. Like, really, who wants to work for someone that doesn't care about you or what you think?
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to be callous about it, but say, like the pressures that are being put on this, hear you, I see you, I understand it's important for you, but I'm not sure how to make it work. It's more about, the not full transparency, but being able to like share perspective and share point of view and where each person is at, disregarding what's the hierarchy between two people in a workplace. Yeah,
I guess we're talking about two different concepts, aren't we? I think it's there's being open and honest, isn't there? And then there's being as transparent as you can, given the context you work within. And then behind that, there's whether you actually do care or not about the people as individuals.
I guess caring about the people, not always the topics, but always caring about the people,
What do you think is the biggest mistake that the majority or most leaders and managers make?
There's a lot of things that leaders do, and that I probably did at some, that's about leading from a place, your own experience, which kind of leads to judgment, rather than leading from a place of curiosity. It's like not two brains works the same. And, like you can't make assumptions about why is someone struggling or why is someone not performing the way you would want them to. So I think approaching it with curiosity rather than judgment makes a huge difference for everyone involved.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that one as well. Yeah, I think it's particularly, not to talk about myself too much, but it's particularly relevant, I think, in the kind of industries that I've worked in and with the kind of managers that I seek to work with today, because in high technology kind of environments, if you try and lead based only on your own experience, the pace of technology changing, you're just never going to be able to keep up. You're always going to end up making the wrong choice. So you've got to, exactly that, you've got to lead with curiosity when it comes to the task focus, the work at hand, and the people who know it best. But also the people themselves. Like, don't assume, as you say, that everyone has had the same experiences as you, everyone's had the same life as you, because no two people are the same. So you've got to ask those questions, find out what they're actually looking for, what their experiences are, what their baseline is, I suppose.
I came across a post on LinkedIn this morning where someone was saying, here are things in the workplace that cost you literally nothing, be on time, and a bunch of other stuff. And it's like, well, that's a very privileged neuronormative way of looking at it. Not everyone's brain allows them to be on time. Not everyone lives close enough distance that they can always be on time, or, so I think looking at it from a place of curiosity, like, rather than be like, well, you should always be on time, it's easy enough. Well, does that person actually stay longer every night? Well, you're getting the work done, aren't you?
Time is an interesting one. This is another one of my bugbears. I can see it from both sides. I think so. I've worked for people who would like shout at you for being late and stuff like that, and then were always late themselves. And so there's that part of it, isn't there? Like, which I think really is more about authenticity and values, isn't it? Like, if you say a thing is important to you, you've got to live that yourself. So that's one thing. But then on the other hand, we talk in the post-COVID world and the remote and hybrid and all that kind of thing. And does being on time actually mean anything anymore? Does being sat at your desk for 8 hours a day actually matter? Or is it really more about, is the job getting done? Are the outputs of acceptable quality or quantity or both? And is everyone happy? Like, are you hitting the bottom line? That's what's more important, not how many hours it takes you to do it, or whether you arrive bang on at 9 o'clock or 10 minutes late or whatever. I mean, do you even arrive if you're sat at home working remotely or at a coffee shop? No, it doesn't matter anymore, does it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting though, isn't it? Seeing posts like that, and you hear a lot of managers and industry leaders talking about it as well. A couple of big famous names have been getting a bit of angst about it recently, haven't they? And it kind of speaks to this. I don't know if it's just a stubbornness, a refusal to change, or maybe they just don't realise the world has changed, or they don't want to acknowledge that, or maybe they liked it better the old ways, so they want us to go back again. I don't know. Maybe it's all of the above, but it is an interesting one.
I think there's a lot about that on control. Like, it's when, people are all showing up at the same time, at the same place. So I completely understand like when people are saying like, seeing each other in person can make a difference to the work, but also still work really weird to me that we use the term, work-life balance, when, should maybe be life-work balance or, life plus, but it's probably a debate for another day.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's one of the only arguments that holds water for me, is the one about the personal connection and the interactions. I think that is right. I agree with that. It does make a better team atmosphere. But I'm also quite cynical about the people who are talking about going back to the office, in inverted commas. Whether that's the reason they're saying it, I don't think it is. I think maybe those of them who've picked up on that, it's because they see it as a good justification.
No, yeah, definitely. And it's also very, lots of people that have been calling for everyone to go back. They don't necessarily have policies in place to help people that are neurodivergent in the workplace or people that are introverts in the workplace. So it's like, okay, so you want to impose that on everyone, but it's only going to benefit your childless, neurotypical extrovert employees. So that's a bold statement to make, that it benefits everyone in the company when we're all in the same workplace together.
Definitely. You've hit the nail on the head there. I think for me, the answer to all of this is just flexibility from leadership. Like there's never going to be, as we said earlier, no two people are the same. So there's never going to be a one policy that is going to work for everyone. And I think the courageous, the modern, the forward-looking leaders are going to be the ones who realise that, acknowledge it, accept it, and then implement something in their policies and the way that they work to allow that to happen. And ultimately, those will be the ones who reap the biggest rewards, because they'll get the best out of everyone, instead of just the 3 or 4 extroverts in the office while everyone else suffers through.
I think we've all been in workplaces, or at least in teams, maybe not the whole workplace, but, when you're in a team that has a good vibe of, curiosity, compassion, empathy, and when you're in one that is extremely, extremely strict. Like, you can literally feel you can, you feel the energy when you're working with those two different teams, and you can really see the results as well.
Yeah, I guess it comes down to the basic core assumption you have as a leader or a business owner about the nature of your employees and why they're there. I think anyone who sees it as the kind of the old-fashioned, almost confrontational view of they'll try and get away with whatever they can and it's my job to keep them in line, that sort of mentality, it's just not going to work anymore. Whereas if you can look at it more as we're all in this together, what can we each of us do to make it better for the others? I think that's a much more powerful approach to leadership in this day and age, definitely.
It's also less infantilizing, because that assumptions that only the CEO knows exactly what's best for every single one of his employees, and he's there to be the warden. It's
like the prison warden. Yeah. No, you're right, absolutely. And it's just factually incorrect now, isn't it? I mean, even if you take the people part of it out and you think of it only in terms of the function or the understanding of the job, I just don't think that's achievable anymore either. We're long past the days of repeatable process and where everything happens the same way every time and the job doesn't really change over years or decades. I mean, that kind of work now is done by robots, isn't it? So it doesn't apply to modern workplaces. Things change so rapidly now. You cannot possibly, as a CEO, let's say, you cannot possibly know every single person's job to the nth degree to have that level of confidence to be able to say, do this way by this time, no excuses. It just doesn't work anymore. So it's a lack of realism there, I think, in that mindset.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really good way of putting it.
Anyway, next question then, which flows very nicely from the last one, I have to say. What can we do as leaders and managers to foster more inclusive workplaces?
I think listen more. Like the days where you had like a meeting with the whole time being the only person talking was the leader of that team, those days are probably over. And I think it's more about collaboration and playing into everyone's strengths. And I think looking as well into the way certain things are done and whether it works for everyone. So when you look at your standard meetings, for example, it doesn't work for most of the time for people that are neurodivergent or people that are introverts. Like, you need to know when is going to be the time for you to share, if you can share ahead of time, if you can share after. And it's kind of, well, we've got that 30 minutes all together and only the extroverts are going to share their point of views. So it's, I guess, like more like the listening piece and setting systems in place so everyone gets to share in a way that they're comfortable to. And it's probably the way that you can get the best out of any teams, isn't it?
Yes, I think so. It's a very difficult thing to do as a manager, though, isn't it? Because there's the base assumption, isn't there, that if you give someone the opportunity to speak, they have something to say, they will. But that's actually not always true, is it? And the context makes a big difference. As an introvert myself, and I'm very close to the introvert-extrovert line, actually, allegedly, according to the test I did a few weeks back. It does matter. So I would have been in my old job perfectly confident talking in a room of 3 or 4 people. But in a management meeting where the entire management team is there, unless I was really, really passionate about a thing, I would just stay silent. And so the leader in that room, who was in both of those rooms, probably thought that because I spoke in one of them, I didn't have anything to say in the other, which wasn't necessarily true. So again, it's back to thinking about the awareness and understanding different people work in different ways. And ultimately, the only way you're going to understand that is ask them that question.
Yeah, and for every meeting setting, like the 3 Ps, purpose, process, payoff. So many meeting invites in the corporate world go out with just like a random line, no description. Like, how to expect people to get value out of that? Like, what's going to be the process? Is someone something? Are you going to be going around to ask everyone what they think, or are you expecting someone to like report back afterwards? And there's also that thing that, in a meeting, in the moment, you're expected to have a thought right away. Like sometimes you need to sleep on it. It's just a bit unrealistic. Yeah, again, to your point earlier, a lack of realism, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. And it's convenient, isn't it, doing it that way? That's why. But yeah, I mean, you've hit a couple of nails on the head there for me about meetings. And yeah, I mean, there's so many hours and days, probably weeks of my life that I will never get back from just pointless meetings. It's so easy to just throw the thing in the calendar, isn't it? We're gonna have a meeting to talk about X, and that's it. That's all you get. Okay, great. What's the point of the meeting? What are we trying to achieve? What's the best outcome? What do I need to know about X before I show up? Or are you just assuming I already know everything about it? Because I don't, but okay. And then you go in, you're expected to have the answer. And then the worst bit of meetings for me, I'm getting on my soapbox again, everyone, sorry. The worst bit about meetings for me is they sort of fizzle to an end and that's it. And you walk out of the room and nobody ever thinks about it again. At the end of the meeting, agree what you're going to do next. Like, don't just say, okay, great, good chat, everyone, bye. That's totally useless. You've wasted hours of time by doing that. Agree what's going to happen next. Is it going to be we'll go away and do some research, find the answers, and then we'll come back and agree a decision? Yes, I would say that should be it, perhaps. But anyway, yeah.
And usually you get another invite that says to follow up on the previous meeting so we can make a decision. No.
But they don't agree that at the end of the meeting. It takes them like 2 weeks to realise nothing actionable came out of it and we need to do it again. And it's just that endless cycle of the same thing over and over and over again. And to me, that's how businesses fail, because there's no actions resulting, there's no decisions being made, and you just end up in this endless cycle of pointless conversations, which is fine for some people. Conversations are fun, aren't they? But you're not achieving anything as an organisation. I'm going to stop ranting about meetings now. Next question.
I get you.
If you could start your business over again, would you do anything differently? And if so, what?
Actually, I definitely would. I'm a big introvert myself. So when I set out my business, I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to have, my little website and I'm going to find people organically. People are going to find me, but I'm going to be, my tiny little person on the corner of the internet. And it took me a while to realize that even though I am an introvert, I don't like people knowing my face or my stuff. I've got my close circle of people who know everything about me. My purpose and my business purpose are so much bigger than me. So, I think if I were to do it again, I would hopefully have that realization sooner. So I could, crack on with a bang rather than try to stay in the shadows for as long as I could before I had that realizations.
I think a lot of us have been through that one. Yeah. A similar experience. Right, how are people going to find me? I'll just do a website. There we go. Job done. And lo and behold, 6 months later, nobody had found me because nobody was looking or knew I was there. So, yeah, that's the double-edged sword of the internet, though, isn't it? Like, on the one hand, it's dead easy. You can just put something up there and forget about it. But on the other hand, getting people to actually look at it and find you is really quite difficult sometimes.
Leadership Heroes.
This is my favourite question. So I ask it to everyone. Everyone gets this one without exception. So it's called Leadership Heroes. And the question is, if you had to pick one person, and they can be alive, dead, past, present, real, or fictitious, who in your opinion would perfectly embody leadership, who would that person be and why?
This is actually the hardest question.
Yeah.
I have one generic one, and it's more of a group than a person, and one that's one person in a very specific area. So already I'm not answering the question properly. The group, I'd say it's like any parent or carer that is unlearning their own stuff, doing the work, so they can try to, raise the next generation to be more understanding, compassionate, and more gentle. This is such hard work, and yet they're the leaders of tomorrow, right? So it's really needed. And the other one that's extremely specific, it's Taylor Swift in a very specific context. I see your face, but wait, hear me out. Apparently, her first albums were all owned by her first label. meaning that she didn't technically own the recording and was not making as much money as she could from, and stuff like that. So she just went ahead and re-recorded all of them, like literally every single song of those albums. So now, and she's put them out. And now when you're going on Spotify, you can find those same songs with, into brackets, Taylor's version, which means that this is the one when she's getting the money. And I found it so badass. And it's a really good lesson for a lot of people out there to be like, well, it's not because you made a bad decision or that at some point someone had the upper hand that you can just shift the tables again.
Okay. Yeah. My eyebrows did go up there, I'll be honest, but it's more because I've not had Taylor Swift chosen before as an example of leader. So I'm always curious to hear new ones. So that's nice. Thank you. I haven't read about that.
Obviously, I thought about the typical one, your Simon Sinek and all of them. But I think it's a more interesting one.
Although interestingly, no one's chosen him yet, so you could have had him.
And it's.
I think it's a good choice for the reason you say it, and I think there is power there, isn't there, in acknowledging your mistake and then doing something about it. And that's leading by example in a big way, I think. So, I can see why you've chosen her. Awesome. Well, Flo, it's been a lovely discussion. I think the last thing to say is if any of the listeners would like to learn more about you, what you do, perhaps get some insight into your business, would you like to direct them towards a website or podcast or book or all of the above?
Yeah, so you can find me on diversityintheboardroom.co.uk and on Instagram at diversityintheboardroom, and hopefully in more places soon, but that's it for now.
Lovely. And I'll put links to both of those in the episode description so everyone can find them easily. Thank you again so much for your time. It's been lovely chatting with you.
Thank you so much for having me, David. That was great.
Flo, thank you so much again for your time today. I really enjoyed that conversation. And listeners, apologies if I did get a little bit triggered by some of those topics, but meetings in particular are one of my pet peeves. So there we go. If you would like to learn more about Flo, about diversity in the boardroom and about the work that she does, I have popped her website address and her Instagram in the episode description. So please do click on those, take a look and reach out to her if you'd like to have a conversation. I'm sure she'd love to hear from you. If you are a new manager, if you're struggling with any of these issues that we've talked about today, if you're looking for ways to get more out of your meetings, for example, and just build a better, more engaged, more inclusive team and workplace environment, Leading with Integrity is here to help. Again, my website is in the episode description, and that's all I've got time for today. I hope you'll join us again next week. Thank you so much for listening today, and until we meet again, as it were, remember, be a leader, not a boss.